Hey Amarillo, I'm Skylar Gallup, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. We record every week at Amarillo College's Innovation Outpost. The IO supports education, workforce development, and industry growth by inspiring and facilitating innovation in the Texas Panhandle. Today's guest is Ryan Hazelwood. Ryan's an Amarillo boy who's lived in a couple other pretty cool towns, moving around in a broadcasting career. That's right, he's a newsie just like me. We talk about leading and working in newsrooms, about the current media landscape. We both share a love for WT's communication department and our respective times there. And Ryan shares what his current work and focus is. In his own words, being a professional cancer fighter. Here's Ryan. Ryan Hazelwood, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast.
Hey, Skylar, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on here.
I'm glad that we caught you. So let's start at the beginning. Where are you from?
I was born in Jefferson City, Missouri, but my folks moved me to Amarillo when I was probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years old.
What prompted the move?
My biological father got a job with Wilson Trailers, selling trailers here in the Texas Panhandle.
Okay. And so what schools did you come up through?
Went to Southlawn Elementary, go Dragons, Fannin Middle School, go Panthers, and Caprock High School, go Longhorns.
You know all of them.
Absolutely.
I know all of mine, but my town was so small, it was just one. What kind of kid was Ryan?
That'd be a better question for my mom, probably. I think it depends on who you ask. No, I think I was, I never met a stranger. I think a lot of that was, when my mom and my biological dad were going through a divorce. My mom jokes around that I cut my teeth on, we lived in a hotel for a while. My mom jokes around that I cut my teeth on the little living room table, the coffee table there in the, waiting area of the hotel. So, and so I was always, I was going to work with her. I was, so I was always around adults. So, as a kid, I always had conversations with adults because I could speak with them. And so I was, pretty outgoing as a kid. Got into a little bit of trouble as I got older, just anything that I think boys get into, you know what I mean?
So your mom was a single mom that raised you?
I mentioned my biological father. I also have an adoptive father. And he was who raised me. I've got his last name. And they both worked at Kilgore, which was a mental facility here in Amarillo a long time ago. Both my mom and my dad did. And my mom was in education. She was a school teacher and did education out there at Kilgore, stuff with education, and other companies before she, finally went teaching full time. But so she was out there doing that, and then my dad that raised me, he drove the bus, and he and I just created a bond. And my mom jokes around that BP married her because of me, not because of anything they had, but it was definitely because of what they had. I mean, they had such a beautiful relationship.
So what did quasi-troublemaker Ryan do after he graduated from high school?
I went back to Missouri for a little bit, spent a semester at Central Missouri State, went there to play football, then came back to Amarillo. My dad that raised me had cancer at the time, and came back to Amarillo and kind of screwed around for a little bit. Then, then he passed away, and, he got his degree while working nights out at, I think it was Quail Creek is what the place was called. It was another mental health facility here in Amarillo. He was working nights out there. He had cancer, was going through treatment, things of that nature. He'd had a below-the-knee amputation of his right leg. And he went to school and got his degree because he wanted to be a coach. And so when he passed, I was debating whether I wanted to be a firefighter or go back to school. And, it became very clear to me that going back to school, would be what he would want me to do. He'd be disappointed in me if I didn't do that. So that's what took me back to enroll in WT. And so that's, went to WT, went through a couple majors, and then found, had a girlfriend who was on the college radio station there. And it was an upper level elective for any major. And so I was like, man, that seems cool. I'll go do that. Walked into the building and I was like, wow, you can major in this, and, because I'd played around with, pre-law and, which was history major, a bunch of different things. But I was like, wow, you can do this. And it kind of joined that, I've always had a heart for service and, and I've always loved to tell stories. Right. And so, I mean, I fell in love with photojournalism, from class one, when I changed my major and went over there full time. So,
What degree did you get?
mass communication.
How was your time at WT as an undergrad?
I loved my time at WT. After losing my dad, I was pretty. I was trying to find something, some solid ground to stand on, and and wasn't finding it a lot of places, and I found it over there at WT. I got very involved with the program. It was the director of the program at that time was Lee Browning, and she left in the middle of my education there to go get her PhD at Mississippi State. And so Melanie, who was the graduate assistant, Melanie Smith, who was the graduate assistant, she taught all of our classes. And Melanie wasn't that much older than us. So it was a lot of, and that program's always given opportunities for leadership, but it was very student-led at that point, just because Lee wasn't there. It was fantastic, man. I made friendships that I still cherish to this day with a lot of those folks. Before I left KOA in Colorado Springs, one of the guys that I went to school with came to KOA to be a producer. Kept those relationships, kept those friendships, and and it's very special to me.
Yeah, I know that the communications department, your time getting an undergrad degree is not the end of your time with the communications department. So let's put a pin in the WT Comms department, because it comes back for you and came for me, and that's where our paths first overlapped. What did you do after you got your degree?
Got my degree. Told you I worked for both Channel 10 and Channel 7 when I was getting my undergrad here, and so I already had a reel. So I graduated and headed to Austin. Had a job at KVUE as a photojournalist.
What year?
1999, and headed down to Austin as a photojournalist, and worked for those guys for a while. I tell folks all the time that I'm a photojournalist by trade. Kind of became a producer by default. Somehow worked at WT again, and then kind of fell backwards into a news director chair.
Going to KVUE in Austin out of college is like a pretty good jump. I graduated and went to San Angelo.
I remember you were also on air though, right? It's a little easier for someone behind the scenes to make that move than someone that's in front of the camera. But I remember, I can't remember what I made, but it was minimum wage when I was working at 10 and 7, right? And I remember I was making. So I'd gotten custody of my daughter at this time. And so I was a single dad living there.
And how old was your daughter?
She was 3 at the time.
Jeez Louise.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My mom will tell you that when I pulled away from her house, when I got full custody of her and headed down there, she was just praying, "Dear Lord, please help him. Dear Lord, please help him." Just saying a prayer. Absolutely.
Oh, man.
But when I got custody of my daughter, the KVUE would not change my work schedule, and I was working the morning show, and so couldn't do that.
Can't
right?
do that.
So I started throwing out reels to to other stations there, and got a job over at KI, which is a CBS affiliate there. Working dayside. Lex came down to live with me, and in that time also, because it was a matter of less than a month, KVUE calls me back and says, "Hey, we got a dayside position. You want to come back?" And
their schedule suddenly
I got
opened
a little
up.
bit more money when I went to KI, and then I was able to get a little bit more money when I went back to KVUE.
Nice.
And I remember sitting out on. They had this loading dock at the back of the station there, and it was fantastic. I'd go out there all the time because my daughter's daycare was right next door, and so
Lovely.
when the kids would go out and play in the playground, I could watch her, or go over there and say hi. But I remember sitting out there on that loading dock, and I remember thinking. Because I went from making minimum wage, and now I'm making like $35,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, I made it. I'm doing what I love.
Sure.
Daycare's
around the corner.
Daycare's right around the corner, and and I'm making $35,000 a year. Heck yeah, it can't get any better than this.
Luckily, the cost of living in Austin was not quite what
Correct.
it is now.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And how long did you do that in Austin?
I don't remember how long I was at KVUE.
Okay.
I mean, 99. I guess I left there in probably 2004.
Cool, handful of years.
Somewhere around there.
And you went from Austin straight back to WT?
No.
Okay. What happened
Austin,
then?
So Austin, then, and I stayed in Austin. So I got a phone call from a good friend of mine, and she had left the news business and said, "Hey, we're opening up and she was working for an episodic television show called Hot on Homes, and it was out of Dallas. Hot on Homes.
Okay.
They're builders and developers. New home communities was, the TV show featured new home communities and was basically paid for by builders and developers.
Sweet.
And so she said, "Hey, we're opening up an office in Austin. Will you help me open it up. And so I started out as a director of photography with them, and then and then realized, hey man, I'm a single dad. I got to start making some money, right? And that 35,000 wasn't going near as far anymore, right? And
how the tides changed.
So I moved to so I moved into a producer position, started producing for them, and then that's what took me to at that time the housing market was just exploding across the country. And that's what took me to Denver.
Right.
Yeah, they had asked me to help them open up some other offices outside of Texas, and then Denver was my central location. And
nice.
So yeah, absolutely.
Great spot.
Denver's an okay town. It's fun to visit, man. I would never move back there. But
okay, there's a whole thing that people who like used to or come from Denver now hate on Denver.
So the last time I remember driving into Denver, and it made an impression on me, right? It was something for work, and I was going up there, and I had to exit to get downtown.
Yeah.
And so I exited I-25 onto Santa Fe Avenue, right? And that's a pretty industrial area anyway. Okay. It was tent city. And that's really what Denver's become.
That's rough.
So Denver's really declined since the early 2000s, at least in my eyes.
Sure.
From what I saw when I lived there, and then what I would see when I would go back and visit. It used to be, a 16th Street Mall was a place that was, very safe. It was a lot of fun. Not near as safe now. Not near as fun now. But
you think it's because of legalization?
I think that brought a lot of folks there.
Yeah.
I think that did bring a lot of folks there who came saying, without a job, thinking I'll get a job when I get there, and it didn't work out for them, for whatever reason. But really, when if you're looking at homelessness, it's it's a lot of substance abuse and it's a lot of mental illness, right?
Very difficult.
And so and I don't know how many of those people were mentally ill or had substance abuse problems that came there in the first place, but I think they thought that I can come and I can and I'll figure it out when I get there. And that really just didn't happen. You look at their, sanctuary policies, things of that nature, and that has led to a lot of folks, coming up to that way as well.
Yeah.
Some of it too is Colorado's an expensive place to live.
It is.
And there's a lot of folks that are working poor there that are living out of their cars and, and going to a job every day just because it is such an expensive place to live. Why they stay there still, I have no idea, but they do.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So you moved to Denver, working there.
Moved to Denver, working there. Bottom falls out of the housing market. So
see previous statement.
Yeah, exactly. At that point, it was, they offered me a job. I was going through a divorce at the time, and they offered me a job to, they said, hey, we want you to move back to Austin, run Austin and San Antonio for us. And going through a divorce, I was, do I move back to Austin and my son, who was very young at that point, he's going to still be in Denver, or do I try to figure something else out? So, and the company was fantastic. They, I would do 2 weeks in Austin, 2 weeks in Denver, 2 weeks in Austin, 2 weeks in Denver.
Nice.
Yeah,
okay.
Until they found somebody to replace me and until I found, something to do.
Cool.
Right. And I ended up, one of our clients down in Austin was opening up a franchise in Denver. He cleaned model homes. I had all the connections from all the builders and developers. And so I did some contract work for him for a while, while I was there. After the Hot on Homes gig, that kind of ran out. And then, as I was still looking for something, in broadcast, he said, hey, you do this, and so did some contract work for him, got his business set up there. And then, was still looking and making phone calls. And I actually, called Dr. Browning and just said, hey, I, having a hard time. You hearing of anything out there? And she said, you should look on the WT website.
Come on.
That's, and so that's how I, found the job out at WT, and that brought me back as the broadcast engineer out at WT, and got my master's and taught some classes, and
brought you home.
It brought me home, absolutely. Made some wonderful, and I was, and that was another time in my life that that I needed some solid ground to stand on. You know what I mean? And coming back to Amarillo, was that for me. I was close enough that I could leave on a Friday after work and see my son Saturday morning, spend the weekend with him, and then drive back on a,
So they were still in Denver?
Yeah, they were still in the Denver area,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I made such wonderful connections out at WT. Probably one of the themes of this is going to be relationships, I guess.
Yeah, earlier when you were talking about the woman that kind of ran the department while Dr. Browning was getting her doctoral degree, you noted like, and she wasn't that much older than me, and I was like, yeah, same.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Um,
exactly.
Talk a little bit, and you'll just have to speak for me as well because it's my experience too about like the special nature of that department. I went through WT's broadcasting department as well. I was under Dr. Browning, who we lost too young a handful of years ago. You know, Randy Ray's out there. I've made many of similar connections that I hold very, very dearly, whether we talk once a month or not. It's just a special place.
It is.
Not to mention a damn good education.
Absolutely. Oh, without a doubt. There's folks from WT that have gone on to do just amazing, amazing things, you know, and not all of them stayed in broadcast even. I mean, they've
Right.
done, and whether it's broadcast is of course what the classes that I taught there and where I spent most of my time there, but, our folks that went into marketing, our folks that, that went into broadcast and then went into marketing, but there are so many folks that I went to school with or that came before me, because really it was like, the Andy Justices and those guys that laid the groundwork for, me when I went to get my undergrad, right? And then I think that, it was my class and the folks that came right after me that then laid the groundwork for, to get the new building and to, and then to move into that building and get that up and running. So that way when, you guys got there, right. It's about a legacy, right? And that's something that they always talked about, the legacy of the WT broadcasting department, right? And I think that was so instilled in us that not only did you want to do good just because, innate in humans,
Do good,
you want to
right?
do good, you know what I mean? But because you wanted to leave something for that next generation of students who are coming up, and you wanted them to have more than what it's kind of like your kids, right? As
Very
a
much
parent,
so.
you see it later, you know what I mean? You make sacrifices for your kids so that way they have a better life than you. And it's always about moving, and hopefully they move that ball forward, their kids move that ball forward, and it continues to advance that, that family and that family name.
Right. That totally is present in the department.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a long list of people that our listeners could listen to the list of names and go like, wow,
Yeah, absolutely.
all of those,
Yes.
within and without broadcasting.
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt.
So I'm actually catching you in town.
Actually, I
Are you
live here
moving
now.
back? Oh, I didn't know.
We moved back about a month ago.
Okay,
Yes.
cool.
Yes.
Well, you are in the town in which you live.
Yes,
But
I
you
am.
have an
I am.
exciting thing happening this weekend.
I do.
What is it?
So this weekend, I am being inducted into the WT Mass Communication Hall of Fame.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a huge honor.
Yeah.
One I don't know that I deserve. There's some really great names that are a part of that already. It's a great honor. It's a great honor. And I'm excited about it. I got a lot of folks coming into town that that I worked with previously. That relationships again.
That's
what I
right.
mean. Who are now some of my best friends. Whether it's folks I worked with back at Hot On. I've got folks from Hot On Homes who are coming.
Cool.
I've got folks that I worked with at KVI when I was the news director at KVI that are coming back in town. But yeah, it is. While I'm excited about the award, I'm really excited to see all of these people that I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's certainly well deserved, and I think speaks to the portion of that legacy that you contributed to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
it.
I'm just blessed to have been a little part of it, really.
Yeah. How long did you work at WT?
5 years.
Yeah.
5 years, right around there. Yeah, and then so left WT. Got a phone call from Tom Pritz, who was the GM at KVI at the time when I was still at WT, and he said, "Hey, I've been looking for
KVI here in town.
yeah, Channel 7
Yeah,
here in town."
Channel 7.
And he said, "Hey, I've been looking for a news director for the past 7 or 8 months, and your name keeps coming up in conversation.
Oh.
Will you go have lunch with me?" And I said, "Are you buying?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Tom, I've never turned down a free meal in my life, man." and so I met
Did you
Tom.
think that you were ready for a news director position?
The wheels of academia turn very slow. I love my time there. I love the students there, but I think a lot of what you have to do to get things done in academia was wearing on me, and so And so it was a nice change of pace. I was ready to get out there and,
The wheels do certainly not turn slow in a newsroom.
Correct. No, they do not.
That's the opposite.
Yes. So it wasn't about, I knew I could do the job, and I actually called, when Tom and I were talking, I actually called the former news director of mine, Frank Vopatella from KView. And I said, and I did ask him, Frank, can I, what do you think? Can I do this? And he goes, oh yeah, absolutely. You're built for this, right?
Oh, cool.
And so,
he's like kind of a storied name.
Frank. Absolutely. He's been in Atlanta.
He's
absolutely. Frank's, and he's just an awesome guy. He's just an awesome person as well. Again, relationships. He was my news director when I was an idiot 22-year-old. You know what I mean? But
having his confidence stepping into the position at Channel 7 is helpful.
Yes, absolutely. And and he said, "Hey, call me if you need. If you got any questions, call me." So I left WT, went over to Channel 7. Was there for about 5 years again, I guess. Went through a sell. Barrington was Channel 7. We were Barrington, and then got bought by Sinclair, which was a really big shock to the system, right? Because Barrington was this small little broadcast ownership group, and and then Sinclair is one of the 3 largest in the nation. And at the time when they acquired Channel 7, they acquired some other groups as well, smaller groups as well, and they were the largest in the nation. So you went from having a personal relationship with Jim Yeager, who owned Barrington Broadcasting, to so you see some guys every once in a while when they fly you to Baltimore and tell you, hey, here's where we need to do better. Here's what the research shows. Here's where
here's where we're cutting your budget.
Correct. All of those things.
Figure it out.
Absolutely. When one station, when a broadcast ownership group is bought by another one, the writing's kind of on the wall that senior leadership in the station is, they're looking to bring in their own folks, right?
Yep.
And it got to the point that I was last man standing, and as far as senior leadership, when they fired Tom, that was, I was like, because Tom and I were the last 2, and they fired Tom, and I was like, all right. We parted ways, not too long after that, and I was on the board for the Humane Society, while I was the news director there, and so they were looking for an executive director at the time because the executive director had left the Humane Society. So I stepped in and did the interim executive director while I continued my job search. Did that for, 4 or 5 months while I was looking. And
super random.
Yeah. I love animals. And so
I love it. It's good work. I just didn't know that.
I've still got, I was a foster fel multiple times over, and our dog that we have now is the one left of the foster fels. But so, left and did that for a little bit while we were looking for an executive director over there, and then I was actually up in Denver visiting my son, and called relationships again, called a buddy, Ross White, who I had worked with while at WT. He was the sales director over at KVII, I believe, local sales director at the time.
Okay.
And he'd called me and said, hey, and we knew of each other. I think he might have actually taken my first job or my second job in the business as a photographer at Channel 7 as his first job when he was a student at when I left to go to Austin. He and I joke around about that.
That's right.
Yeah, small world, right?
Yep.
But I'd called Ross just to see if he wanted to have lunch. I was coming back from visiting my son, and he said, I want you to stop by the station. And I said, Ross, I'm not meeting anybody. I am wearing flip-flops, cargo shorts, and a Oakland Raiders T-shirt. And he was like, all right, I'll see you in an hour.
Okay, great.
And so I went up to the station. He introduced me to the general manager at KOA at the time. And
in your flip-flops.
In my flip-flops, absolutely.
Wonderful.
And,
well, I'm glad you didn't change for it.
Yeah, no, I didn't have anything else to change into, man. I was going for a nice weekend with my son in Denver, right? So, and I had an hour to get down there. So went down there, and then, Evan's a character, and, he drew out the hiring process, making sure that I wanted that job is really what he was, because I was getting other job offers from other stations that I was interviewing with. But, Evan, do I have an offer from you or do I not have an offer from you? Because I got an offer on the table from this other station. And I'm not ready to make an offer yet. And then when he didn't, and so I turned down that job blindly, thinking that, because I wanted to be closer to Gannon, right? To my son.
Yeah.
And
how old was he at this time?
He was going into high school.
Oh, that's
right?
so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I turned that job blindly, and then I called Evan and I said, man, I turned down that job. I sure hope I get this one. And he goes, I just wanted to make sure you were in.
Oh,
when can you
man.
start? Yeah, absolutely.
That's rough. Golly. Could have made it easier on you.
He was great. I learned so much from him.
That's how the news industry is, though.
It is.
That would be how that happens.
It is.
Stinkheads.
And but I learned so much from him. all of my bosses, I think and some of them I've learned what not to do. Some of them I've learned, man, I'm going to take this and I'm going to add this to my toolbox,
Yep.
And then I was at KOA for 7 years, I guess. And then I was diagnosed with cancer in 2022, and colon cancer, stage 3 colon cancer. And, had colon resection and went through chemo then. And I was still working through
You
that.
went back to work.
Worked through chemo the entire time, took off the 30 days or whatever it was for the surgery and to recover. Worked through chemo, for those rounds of chemo. I think it was like 3.5, 4 months, something like that. I did them every 3 weeks at that first time. And
So before we go into the next chapter.
oh, okay, yeah.
I think that when I think about anybody that has spent any amount of time in a newsroom, certainly in leadership, the news director it's the top dog in the newsroom itself. There's a lot of other working parts to a news station, but I would really like to just kind of like hear your reflections on your time leading a newsroom. We'll start with that.
Every newsroom's different. You know what I mean? Really, what I would tell folks, my job as a news director was culture, right? Especially when you get into bigger newsrooms, because
Right.
you have so much more support staff, being executive producers, chief photographers, things of that nature, right? And those folks are focused on the product on a daily basis. Your executive producer is focused on what's the next newscast. Chief photographer, does it look good?
The tough
production director,
decisions, things
absolutely.
like that.
Yeah. And so, so as a news director, my job was to, swoop in and help when I could. You know what I mean? When they needed me. I'm a very big believer in making decisions. They've got to live with the people in the newsroom have to live with the decisions that I make, right? So let's get input from them before we make a decision and make sure it's something that, that accomplishes the goal, but it's also something we can all live with, right?
Sure.
So that was, so my job as a news director really, was, helping out when I could, when they needed me, and and then making sure that culture was, that we were a great place to work and that we were doing great journalism. That's why the folks got into that. Here in Amarillo, starter market, and so really a lot of that job is teaching, and I think that that's part of the reason why, Tom reached out to me, because he knew he needed someone to help teach, these first job folks who didn't go to WT and didn't get that education. And, and they're coming in 4 years behind these kids that are graduating from,
I don't care what J school you went to. It's hard.
It is. But no. So, I think it's different, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made every day. And I think that's one of the things that I'm learning right now is, you'll see my shirt that I have on from my church, and it says, pause, ponder, pray, right? Because I'm so used to making these snap decisions, and that's more of a reminder. The shirt's more of a reminder for me. And I'm so used to making these snap decisions, and that now I have the luxury of, let's think about this, let's ponder it,
That's
let's
right.
stop, let's ponder,
Take a
let's
minute.
think about it, and let's take it to God. Yeah. So and so I'm trying to get better about that in my life now, instead of just making snap decisions.
Okay, so you started working in news in mid to late 90s, you said?
Yeah, 97, I think.
So
is
what,
when I started
25
at
years?
Channel 10.
30?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
We
yeah.
won't make it. We'll say 25.
Okay, let's say that.
How do you feel about the state of media?
Wow. Yeah, that's a big one, right? It's changing. Traditional ways of consuming content are dying. And whether that be over-the-air television, cable television, satellite television, folks are streaming. 2020, huge shift in the streaming audience, and the folks that are streaming. I think there's still a place for local news. I think the national folks have left objectivity, especially when you're talking about the network news, your CNNs, your MSNBCs, your Fox News. I don't care which way they're leaning. They've all left objectivity in the dust. People don't trust them because,
Right.
And the folks that are going to those places are, typically looking for echo chambers.
Looking for what they're getting.
Absolutely. Your national news, I think they lost credibility through COVID, lost tons of credibility through COVID and the first Trump administration, the way they covered Trump, and then, didn't cover Biden that same way, or didn't cover, and Obama and Trump were two very different presidents, but I think you could look at Trump and Biden and look at how they covered them and say, okay, yes, there was definite bias in the way that they covered those two presidents. Media bias was something that I worked on when I was at WT.
Yeah.
As far as research.
Important.
But I think that the local news, I think there's still a place for local journalism. I don't know, and that's really my specialty, right? That's what, that's what I did, and so I don't know what that'll look like. There's not enough eyeballs for 3 different stations or 4 different stations in a market to survive anymore.
4 different newscasts a day.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and really the way that it's being delivered right now is dying, and that's why they're all trying to get you in their streaming apps. One of the things that I think the broadcast industry, the local broadcast industry, hung their hat on was their brands, right, and brand favorability. And I think that they thought that they could enter the streaming game and the app game late, and that that brand awareness and that brand favorability would be enough for them to get those people into those ecosystems. And it's not, because they left. Whether it was conservatives leaving, Republicans leaving from 2016 on, whether it was a whole nother handful of folks leaving, in 2020, post 2020.
Right.
It's a smaller audience. And I hope that folks are smart enough to understand the difference between your ABCs, your NBCs, your CBSs, and your
Channel
KMRs,
7,
your KVIIs, your KFDAs. You know what I mean? Although I've taken phone calls, and not everybody is. Can I speak to Lester Holt? No, you cannot.
Geez.
I don't have his number or a way to get a hold
Right.
of him. So I think there's a place. There will be a place for local news. And I think it will. And I think it will be app-based, streaming-based, that type of stuff for any kind of video. It'll probably, you'll probably see 1 ownership group per market, maybe 2 ownership groups per market. And now the way it's going, the talk of relaxing ownership rules and things of that nature. There's already a lot of markets that are, they might have 4 stations, but those 4 stations are owned by 2 different owners.
Yeah.
And so they're already there.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see more of what you see on Channel 7 here, where they're recording the stuff first and then playing it back, almost like a playlist, if you will. That's what we were doing with some of our newscasts. That's what Scripps started doing in some of their smaller markets. And we even did it with our noon newscast in our 4 o'clock in Colorado Springs. Just because it frees up time, right?
That's right. You can't staff a studio.
Correct.
All day and night.
Bingo. Exactly. It frees up time. You're able to do these things, and then it lets in my opinion, because your nightly news, your CBS evenings, your World News Tonight, those are all recorded. You're watching those recorded, right? They're not live. And so,
nobody delivers the news that perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. And live was a huge proposition in 1980, right? Because we didn't have cell phones.
Yeah.
Now I can go live talking to my mom.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Going live is no longer a value proposition. So, hopefully at least the way we were working on those things is it would give our journalists more time to worry about the journalism.
There you go.
Focus on the journalism that day. But, I do think, you've got to have those boots on the ground locally. They've got to be making connections locally. They've got to understand the people. They've got to care about the community. That's the biggest thing, is getting folks that actually, especially in TV news, is making sure you had folks that were going to come and we're going to actually care about that community. We're going to pour themselves into that community. Things like the Tribune, I think that absolutely has, will have an even larger place in the Chronicle down in Austin. And that's kind of been a cornerstone of that community for a long time down there. The Chronicle has been, but I think that those will start to get larger, have larger places in the media landscape. Podcasts, local podcasts, things of that nature. Because we've still got a local government. We've still got people that care about what's going on in the local government, and there needs to be people out there who are filing Freedom of Information Act requests, and who are keeping folks honest, right?
I hope that your comment that there will always be boots on the ground remains true. I remember when I was working in local TV, my kind of driving or motivating factor in the work was like the idea that, CNN and Fox can and are better resourced to cover the large federal issues, the Supreme Court and all of those things that are super splashy, but they are absolutely unpositioned to cover what's going on in my community.
Oh, absolutely.
Furthermore, I believe that the things that happen closer to you impact you the greatest.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the importance of local news. And so whether it be, it's up to the industry to determine how they're going to solve those problems. But I would be very, very worried about the health of our respective communities if we didn't have boots on the ground journalism.
Well, and that's why it won't last, right? And it's really the people who are going to decide whether or not what these ownership groups are doing, whether they want to consume that.
That's right.
That's just empty noise. If you don't have boots on the ground, you're not. And you see that when something large happens, and then the national media swoops in. They're there for a couple days, a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, and then they take off.
Totally empty coverage.
Absolutely. And the stories the good stories, the stories that matter, are because when I was at Channel 7, Steve Kirsch, I remember we had a tornado. We had tornadoes active in the area, right? And I'm standing in the newsroom. And Kirsch is on the green screen, and I'm, listening to him, watching what he's, trying to figure out, do we cover commercials, all those things.
That's right.
And
making those quick decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, and I believe it was near Derzet that Steve says, I've got a confirmed tornado on the ground, and it is about 2 miles from this little red schoolhouse, 3 miles east of Derzet, or something, something that and the reason why he knew that is because he spent time doing the SchoolNet system in those, in those communities. And, and so he was able to talk to them like he
provide absolutely life-saving.
Absolutely. And if you don't have that, and you don't have those, and that's what, and I stopped even thinking about everything that I was supposed to be doing with my job, just in awe of Kirsch, who's up there and is that in tune with his community.
Yeah, for sure.
And people aren't going to buy the product on a local level unless it's in tune with their community. Unless there are boots on the ground. So like I said, it's up to them whether, what they're going to do, but it's up to the people whether or not it's going to work. And if it's not going to work, there will be a vacuum, and somebody will fill that vacuum. Something will fill that vacuum.
Well, thank you for providing me that conversation. I really think it's very interesting and really, really valuable. So you're news director at KOAA.
So news director at KOAA. In 2022, found out I had cancer.
Yeah.
Stage 3 colon cancer. Had colon resection done, did the chemo, and then I was in remission for about 2 years. About a year ago.
And when you went into remission, like the doctors were like, "You're good, dude."
Yeah. After
they were pretty confident.
Yeah, absolutely. After my first 2 years, when I went for my, because I was, reoccurring checkups after I went back for that.
Sure.
Everything was good, and I was, the last one that I went to, I had CT scan, had blood work. Blood work had never really shown anything. Again, they said, hey, you're 2 years out from your diagnosis. Folks that make it 2 years out and it hasn't come back are 98% that it won't come back. But about a year ago, it did. I now have stage 4 metastatic colon cancer, which means the cancer has moved from my colon to the peritoneum of my abdomen. And so been a professional cancer fighter for the past year.
I first want to flag, you initially found out that you had colon cancer from a colonoscopy.
Absolutely, yes. Men, go get your colonoscopy. Do not be embarrassed by it. Do not be ashamed by it. Worst part is not getting to eat leading up to it, and and having to clear yourself out. But when you go in and get it done, they put you asleep, and then you just wake up.
Get your colonoscopy.
Without it, I probably would have been dead years ago, to be honest.
Yeah.
So especially with how aggressive the cancer is, and so on and so forth. It wouldn't have been a good thank the Lord for my wife. She's the one who was all over me to get it, and actually scheduled it for me with my primary care physician because I was dragging my feet so much. But yes, men, go get your colonoscopies. 40. They say the age is 45 when you should start getting it. I think they should lower that age just based on the numbers of colon cancer that we're seeing right now
how old were you?
to 35. I was 46.
46?
I was 46, yes.
Yeah.
I was 46. And they think that I'd had it for about 5 years.
Wow.
That it started about 5 years before that. But yeah, I mean, we changed our diets, and I've got nothing medical to back this up or any studies or anything like that, but we've got a huge huge rise in colon cancer right now. I believe it's the fastest growing cancer in the United States. I think it might be now the largest population of cancer patients.
Wow.
And look what I'm the first generation to be raised on McDonald's, Burger King, fast foods, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Don't know if I can say those names out loud. Please
We're
cut that out. But no, I'm not, my generation is the first generation to be raised on those fast foods. be raised on those ultra processed foods, And I think what we're seeing now is, with the huge rise in these colon cancers and things of that nature, is we're seeing that, hey, human body's really not meant for these things. Human body's meant for fresh foods and for non-hormone meat and things of that
preservatives,
nature. Absolutely.
And these dyes and all
Absolutely.
of it.
Absolutely.
Certainly worth looking into.
Yeah.
Personally, for your own.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
look at what you're putting in your body.
Absolutely.
And then make your own decision.
I mean, it's your
about it.
fuel. It's your fuel.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife has this app for her phone. I don't know the name of the app, but you can scan the barcodes on food, and there is nothing healthy for you, basically. Everything that is, that is at the grocery store, and her and I joke around now because, I'll be like, oh, we got X, Y, or Z from the grocery store, and she's like, oh. I'm like, have you scanned this? This app has ruined everything that we like to eat. Steak and baked potatoes, still good though.
No, there you go. There you go. Steak and baked potatoes, man.
And I understand why, they started making all those ultra processed foods. It was because of starvation, around
many
the world,
people.
Absolutely being able to feed and, feed a population. But there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a healthier way, something.
Okay, so what are you doing right now?
What am I doing right now? Right now I am, I live 2 months to 2 months, right? At this point, I was on chemo for, about the first 9 months. Started out on the one that I had been doing before, and then they moved me to a different chemo that was much more intensive and much, and it was horrible. I was living life every 2 weeks at that point because I had treatment every 2 weeks.
Right.
And so I'd have 1 week that I was just felt horrible. And then 1 week that I would start to feel better just, to get, punched in the nose.
Go
one
do
more
it
time.
again, yeah.
Absolutely. And that wasn't working, wasn't shrinking the tumors the way they had hoped. Because I have two that are in kind of precarious places, and we need to get those shrunk so that way they can do surgery. Surgery is what kills cancer. Chemo does not cure cancer. And so we weren't seeing those tumors shrink. So right now I am, I've been off chemo for about 3.5 months at this point, getting strong, letting my body heal so that way I can, any clinical trials that might be beneficial to me, I can qualify for those. Because if your bone marrow is not up to snuff, then, they'll say, sorry, bud, you're not here. So right now, I've gone back to last trip to MD Anderson. They said that tumors had not grown, and that was after 2 months off of chemo.
Okay.
Tumors had not grown, but they expected that just because chemo stunts those tumors. So I go back here in a couple weeks for my next updated scans and to see if we found a clinical trial and what that looks like. So hopefully it still has not grown, and if we found a clinical trial, great. If not, then I'm really enjoying feeling good right now. I cannot complain. That it was a blessing.
You look healthy.
Thank you.
You look
Thank
good.
you.
Got good color.
Thank you. Yeah. A lot of people, are worried about what I'm going to look like when they see me, just because.
I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah. And but I'm lost that 40 pounds. I've gained it back. So I'm the oncologist at Texas Oncology, which is where I transferred my care here. He said, Ryan, you're not an ideal candidate for some kind of clinical trial or something like that. You're in great shape. You're healthy. You
He
look
said
good.
you are a good candidate.
Yeah, I'm
a great candidate.
Yeah,
okay,
he said,
great.
He said, they're looking for candidates like you.
A healthy body. Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So, if you would have seen me a year ago when I was down to 160 pounds, you probably would have thought something totally different. I mean, my doctors, when we found out, that the cancer had come back, and I saw my primary care physician. He actually drove up to my work to tell me what the scans had said when he finally read them, when he was able to see them before I even went to see the oncologist. He was just a fantastic doctor. I think because I had lost so much weight and was so sickly at that point, I think they were like, because I asked Dr. Vu, I said, so if I don't do anything, what does that mean? He said 9 months. 9 months if you do nothing. If you don't do any chemo, don't do anything. I said, so with chemo, what does that look like? And he was like, a year, maybe 2 years, some people 3, some people 5, some people live to 10, and, but I think he was very worried
How
that
does
I
that
was
feel,
not.
Ryan?
I think the first place your mind goes, at least first place mine went, was to my wife and kids.
How old are
it was kinda
Lexi and
funny.
Gannon?
Lex is 28, Gannon's 21. Yeah, I know. Don't blink, man. Don't blink. They'll grow up on you. Lex is married now.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I had some time between the time that I left my office that day and we had to be back at the oncologist, and my wife and I lived about 45 minutes to an hour away from Colorado Springs. We lived in the mountains in a little town called Florissant. And so, so I had time to drive up there, pick her up, and then us drive back down. And I remember driving up the hill, and I was like, man, I'm going to miss waking up to my wife's face every morning. And I thought, man, that's stupid. She's going to be the one waking up. So, yeah, that's exactly where your mind goes.
Sure.
Did I do a good enough job as a dad? Was I a good enough husband?
Relationships again.
Absolutely.
And I know that you met Larissa. How long ago did you meet her?
So I've known Larissa since 7th grade.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we actually went to Fannin together. And, and we kind of stayed in contact, because we had mutual friends in and out of each other's life, for as we grew up, really. Even she went to Emerald High, I went to Caprock.
Small town.
Yeah, absolutely. And, she would come back and visit. She lived in, Dallas for a while, moved back here, then moved back to Dallas. And, we'd run into each other at, mutual friends' houses, because I was Austin, then here, then Denver, Austin, Denver, then here, then, then back to Colorado. And, but we'd run into each other. And my buddy who lived across the alley from me, Greg, he was married to Larissa's sister. And so Greg and Jamie had gone through a divorce, and Larissa had just gotten back from the Texas Emmys, and Larissa I'd taken my cousin to the Texas Emmys, and Larissa saw that, and so she reached out to Greg and said, hey, does Ryan have a girlfriend? And I did not have a girlfriend at the time. And
hey, Larissa.
Yeah, there we go. So
I like it.
So I think I probably hit her up on Facebook or something like that. I was like, hey, what's going on? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something stupid. Exactly. And she was in Dallas at the time. I was here in Amarillo, and then moved to Colorado Springs, and then she moved up there with me.
How long have you been together now?
We just had our 7th anniversary, wedding anniversary, on the 29th.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I imagine, because she is a woman, has been an amazing pillar of strength through this.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
And you know me, I don't get speechless very often.
That's true.
I really don't. I mean, I don't know what I would do without her.
I'm glad you got her.
Me too. Yeah.
I think a lot of times people that are battling or have battled cancer say that there are also like a lot of really valuable lessons.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
What's that been like?
Cancer sucks.
Yep.
But, it's also, kind of knowing that, hey, who knows what tomorrow holds, or 6 months from now holds, or a year from now holds. We get so caught up in our day-to-day life, whether it's work, whether it's, name 100 things out there, right? But I think, not knowing and knowing that something could, and we all know that, right? But I think it's, it's more impressed on you, and and so it is about those relationships and making those relationships stronger, and whether that's relationship with individuals, relationship with God, whether all of those things, like I said, cancer sucks, but in some ways it's a blessing that you get to that you get to tell people how much they meant to you, that you get to get your life right, all of those things. Does that make sense?
It does. Maybe like brings things into focus.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Being a news director, you work 60, 70, maybe 80 hours, probably 80 hours a week. And, and
nope.
Yeah, I ain't doing that no more.
Nope.
If my cancer is cured, I ain't going back to that ever,
That's very interesting.
I will find something else.
Yeah.
I'll find something else because, it's the people around you, the people who love you, that's what's important.
It would be lovely if that weren't a lesson you have to learn the really hard way.
Absolutely.
Like before.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Everybody's prideful. And it's a human condition, right? Pride. So, I think knowing that you're human in your humanity, I think it humbles you for sure.
Today's episode is exclusively sponsored by West Texas A&M University's Department of Communication. As you've heard, Both Ryan and I are alumni of the department, and you can tell we are quick to tout the quality of education and experience we received during our times in WT's media communication program. I carried the professional and life lessons I learned there into my first career in TV news and beyond, even today, and it's clear that Ryan did too. For more information, visit wtamu.edu/communication. All right, back with Ryan Hazelwood.
Hello. All right, this is the lightning round right here?
This is it,
Okay.
8 straight. I'm going to ask 8 questions. You can answer in as much or little detail as you want. And as you pointed out, you have just returned.
I have.
So your answers can be outdated from when you were at WT, or they can be like, I don't know, I can't wait to find out.
Okay.
Cool.
Let's do it.
When you think of Amarillo 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
I hope Amarillo is still a thriving, growing community. This is home. It, has always been home. I love this town. I hope it's a thriving, growing community. It's almost a best kept secret, right? And it's because of the people, right? I think that's what makes this place. I think Amarillo has so much promise. Amarillo has, and I don't think that Amarillo always realizes the promise that it has. And I think part of that's because you got 3% of the people that come out to vote here. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people like to complain. Yep. You know what I mean? So I think for that 10-year vision of Amarillo, I think more people got to involve. You got to get involved. They can't just stand on the sidelines and then throw fits when things don't go their way. They've got to get involved. They've got to know, like you said earlier, you have more ability to affect change at the local level than you do in Washington, D.C. or somewhere like that, right? And so instead of worrying about what Trump's doing or, what the Democrats are doing, let's worry about what, our county commissioners, our city commissioners. Let's worry about, what our planning commission. Let's start paying attention to those things, because that's where you really have a chance to make a difference in your community and you really have a chance to affect some change. I mean, I remember as a kid, my mom and my buddy DJ's mom got a light at the intersection of 45th and Parker right there, because we would cross 45th Street to go to the park and it was dangerous. There was more traffic, but, they affected change locally, right?
Awesome.
And I think when, looking at that and looking at what my hope for Amarillo, I think it takes the community getting involved for a community to be a thriving community.
I agree. Other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
So just coming back, and I did stay up on Amarillo. I mean, I would come back and visit my mom. Yeah. I would come back and visit friends. What does Amarillo have too much of? I would say apathy. I would say apathy to continue on what we were just talking about. I think, Amarillo has too much of folks that sit on the sidelines and complain, but don't get out and get their, I don't know if it's hands dirty, but, don't go out and even check a box, man. Forget about getting your hands dirty trying to make something happen. They don't even get out to check a box. 3%. Yep. Come on.
What does this area not have enough of?
Pride in the area. A lot of folks, again, like to throw stones. But Amarillo's got a amazing art scene. Yep. If you haven't been out to First Friday, go out to First Friday. Yep. We've got amazing artists. Amarillo has an amazing music scene. Amarillo has, they've got amazing churches in this town. There is, you name it, there is something for folks to do. My buddy Greg says, always a good time in Amarillo, and there's always something to do, right? And there really is if you look for it. And so I think that, if I would say what Amarillo needs is, pride, and I think when you get away from here, folks are proud to be from West Texas. They're proud to be from the Texas Panhandle, man.
But it's like when we're here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally get that.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're here, we're like, Yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite local building?
Would probably be the house that I grew up in.
Oh, I love that answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
5104 Parker Street.
You win. Favorite local restaurant?
Golden Light Cafe, hands down. Yeah, hands down. Yep. As a matter of fact, folks coming in town for the thing at WT tomorrow or on Saturday we're going to Golden Light tomorrow night.
See you at Golden Light.
Absolutely.
Ryan, how do you describe Amarillo to people outside of the area?
I tell this story, and really it's not Amarillo, right? I mean, Texas Panhandle is what I'm talking about here. But I tell this, because the people here are salt of the earth, man. You will never meet better people than you meet in the Texas Panhandle. And, and I think that's the best kept secret about this place, right? Is how amazing the people are. And so when we were living in Denver, my daughter and I were coming back to visit my mom in Amarillo. We were driving back, and and she was maybe 10, 11 at this time. And we stopped in Dumas, so that way she had to use the bathroom, right? So we stopped in at, I think it was a Toot and Totem in Dumas. And hey, do you need me to go in with you? No, I got this, Dad. Okay. She pops out of the truck, pops inside, and I see her chatting with, the girl, probably asking where the restroom's at, in the store, the girl behind the counter. And so she goes, and, I see her disappear, and then she comes back and, sits there and chats with that girl some more. And then she comes back and she says, Dad, you're in the Texas Panhandle because people are so nice. And so that's, if people want me to describe the Texas Panhandle, I tell them that story.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Yeah.
What is the most underrated aspect of living here?
Takes 15 minutes to get anywhere in town, which is fantastic.
Amen.
Commutes are underrated. And for me, again, going back and, looking at the whole picture, I think it's the relationships that I had with people that, that I didn't necessarily water those relationships as much as I should have before I came back. Mm. So I think I underrated the people here. How about that?
Yeah, that's fair self-reflection. When was the last time you went to Paladora Canyon?
When we were looking for houses. We actually looked at a house on the rim of Paladora Canyon.
Oh, nice.
Had an HOA.
Oh, yeah, I can't either.
I'm out.
Bless them.
Yeah, so that was the last time. So I want to say 2 months ago.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ryan, that concludes 8 Straight. I like to wrap these wonderful conversations up by asking my guest to endorse something. What would you endorse?
I'm going to endorse my church.
Oh, nice.
That played a big reason in why my wife and I moved back to. We'd been looking for churches in Colorado for the entire time we were there, and just never really found one that stuck. My niece was getting baptized, and so we came up here for her baptism, and this was before the cancer came back or anything. And I leaned over to my wife while we were sitting there through the service after the baptism, and I said, "This is the kind of church that we're looking for in Colorado." And so we actually started attending via YouTube, and whether it was Sunday mornings via YouTube. I started going to they do YouTube with their men's group on Tuesday mornings. I started doing that, and now that we're here, we get to go every Sunday and enjoy the fellowship of those folks up there. So, and we'd go in person when we would come through town or something like that. But yeah, Harvest. What I'm going to endorse Harvest Connection.
Harvest Connection. Where's it at?
Absolutely. 45th. The old bells right there. They've turned that. That's the sanctuary. Cool. 45th in Tekla. How about that? 45th in Tekla, right there. Yeah, great people. Great message, and I would absolutely endorse it.
Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Congratulations for this weekend.
Thank you very much.
I'll be there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I hit up Amy, and I was like, I don't have a date. Come with me.
Is Amy coming?
Yes, we're coming.
That's so awesome.
We're excited to celebrate you, and similarly to reconnect in the relationships.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
WTAMU's Department of Communication has online and on-campus undergraduate and graduate degrees in Communication and Media Studies. The department is really proud of its students and their successes. Scholarships and internships help communication and media students thrive at WT and in their future careers. If you or your business are interested in supporting or taking advantage of scholarship and internship opportunities, visit wtamu.edu/communication. And that concludes the episode. Thanks to Ryan for the interview. Thanks to WT's Department of Communication for exclusively supporting this episode, and to Angelina Marie for editing every week. And thank you for listening. This has been episode 417 of Hey Amarillo. I'm Skylar Gallup, and we hope you'll come back next week.